It may be hard for some to believe now, but if you were there, you remember. On December 19th, 2001, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring was released in theaters, with many people anticipating that a big budget fantasy film was doomed to failure. And this particular fantasy film was double or triple doomed because 3 films had been shot at once, putting at risk New Line Cinema for bankruptcy and leaving its owners, AOL Time Warner, with 2 films to release in the next 2 years that would immediately be dead on arrival. Things sounded especially grim in the spring and summer of that year when ruin was the prediction. As the movie release date drew nearer, there were some signs that there was some real enthusiasm for this movie. The predictors of box office totals thought that the film might open that weekend between 10 and 25 million box office dollars. My perception and my experience was vastly different. I knew a community of people who were hanging on every word written by the press, were delighted by every promotional photo that they could get their hands on, who were at the record store when the DVD of the soundtrack was released a month early so they could listen to all the themes and figure out what was what. People, including yours truly, had figured out when tickets went on sale, had banded together collectively, and bought out theaters for opening night. I knew lots of people who were so excited that when Pearl Harbor came out, people went and bought tickets for its first showing because it would have the first official trailer of The Fellowship of the Ring. And they watched, and then they left. So when the dust settled after that first weekend of The Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, it had grossed $47.5 million, nearly double what the prognosticators predicted it might do at its highest performance. And here we are 25 years later, and it's been announced that the films will play again in their extended edition on an event sponsored in January by Fathom Entertainment. But of course, January is just the beginning of the 25th anniversary, so maybe we'll have other celebrations all year long. But that is far from the biggest news in the Tolkien realm right now. Warner Brothers, that owns New Line, is being purchased by Netflix unless it's purchased by Paramount. And whoever wins that bidding war will own these films. They will own The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. They will own The Two Towers, and they will own The Return of the King, and they will own the extended editions, and they will make determinations about when and where and how they are released or streamed or seen or packaged to you. And they will make another decision. They will make a decision if the long requested, long hoped for, long fabled ultimate edition of The Return of the King, The Two Towers, and The Fellowship of the Ring will ever see the light of day. Even if you've never heard of it, or if you don't remember it, I assure you, Peter Jackson does. That's what we're talking about. So we are getting to see a 25th anniversary edition of Fellowship of the Ring in theaters. Hooray! And The Two Towers. And Return of the King. Hooray. And it's the extended edition for all 3. Hooray. That's the 25th anniversary we're getting, but it is not the 25th anniversary edition we deserve. My name is Larry, and you are listening to the Tolkien Podcast. If you live in an area that has D-Box theaters, you will be able to see The Fellowship of the Ring on January 16th, The Two Towers on January 17th, and The Return of the King on January 18th. If you don't, you can watch them the following Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, January 23rd through the 25th of 2026. Some of you may not be aware of what or who Fathom Entertainment is, but they do events, single events in theaters all over the place in all kinds of genres. I'm not sure that they operate anywhere outside of the United States, but I will say that all over the world, there are independent theaters not in every city, but pretty much in every major city. And it behooves you as a film patron to go to those and to talk to a manager. And pretty often you could get them to do a Lord of the Rings special screening for you in your town. Just let them know. They are always looking for ideas of how to boost their income or have special events that bring people out. So if you don't have Fathom Entertainment, you're not stuck at all. And it's actually not very expensive for a theater to acquire catalog films. And if they have any kind of promotional mechanism in place, like newsletters or whatever it is, if they can reach their fan base, they probably can turn a profit. And especially if you tell them, hey, I know Lord of the Rings fans around here, and they would show up if you replayed these movies. Okay, so I did go to the Fathom Entertainment website. I looked at all their events that are coming up. There's a bunch of Christmas events like the Royal Ballet, the Nutcracker on December 21st and 25th. Dick Van Dyke, a bunch of Christmas stuff. Anyway, there's all kinds of events there. And I read the release for this particular event, and I thought it was really amusing enough to share. It said in the this big press release that hypes up the movies and explains how great they are, and you can see them for a couple of days. And it also had a different part of it that it said there will be, and this is a quote, limited edition concession vessels for the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And so some of you may wish to rush out and grab those up, but I think what that means is popcorn containers. There's, depending on the theater chain, you can buy collectible vessels, popcorn vessels, let's call them. That's a great word. So here we are 25 years later getting popcorn vessels, and we're getting the extended editions released in theaters for the 25th anniversary, which is really the 25th anniversary of Fellowship, since the other two weren't out yet. And that's great. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you go to them. But many of you maybe can't get that day off work or the right day off work or 3 consecutive days out of your life to do that. It's a little challenging. That's not the 25th anniversary the films deserve. And that's not the 25th anniversary that fans deserve. What is deserved is the ultimate edition of those DVDs for home video that we've heard about for a long time, although not too much recently. The impact those films made on cinema, on popular culture, is still being felt all the time, all over the place. You can feel echoes both of Tolkien and of Jackson's adaptation of Tolkien in popular culture today, at the movie theaters today, on streaming services today, on Amazon today, that's for sure. There are some natural questions that must be addressed in this part of the conversation. One would be, what is the ultimate edition of Lord of the Rings films look like? What would be on it? What content is there? Another question might be, how in the world can there be more? How could there be longer films? Well, let's talk about all those things. But I think first we have to put some context behind it. So first we're going to talk about the extended editions. Many may not be aware, but before these films even hit theaters, there was conversation or talk or rumors about extended editions of them. That at least for home video, there might be extended versions of the films so that fans wouldn't have to miss moments that maybe aren't suitable quite for theaters or for the general public, but they would have little special moments that would extend Tolkien's works. That was the hope and the rumor, but it kind of sounded too good to be true. Imagine that you're a fan back then and you're waiting for these films and you're afraid they will suck and you hear that the studio is doomed. But meanwhile, you also hear that the guy who directed The Frighteners, this Peter Jackson, cares so much about the film that he's filming parts that probably can't make it in theaters, but will be released on home video at a later date, or at least that's the hope. That's kind of hard to believe. It seems unprecedented even today. But back in those days, the internet was young. Google was used by professionals, but not by common people. In fact, clear until like 2004 did it take over as the main search engine. But Peter Jackson knew how to use the fan press, which was brand new, to float these rumors about the extended edition. So December 2001, Fellowship of the Ring comes out, and by spring, New Line Cinema announces that yes, indeed, There will be a theatrical release on DVD, and there will be an extended edition released in the same year, May and November. And turns out those DVD releases, the extended editions, would have extensive extra content on it. Film school in a box, it's often been called. And it had something like 12 or maybe 16 hours of commentary about the film, so you could watch the films over and over. Now, the home video market was lucrative for studios back then, but that's still a lot of content, and it had been clearly planned. You have to shoot that well in advance. You can't decide at the last minute to do that. So Jackson and New Line decided to invest heavily in that DVD edition, and maybe they were worried that they wouldn't make theatrical money back, but they could make home video market money back because fans were so into Tolkien. So it turns out that the May DVD release did really well, and so it probably gave the studio confidence, especially as the film did really well, overperformed massively. So they invested pretty heavily into the extended edition version of the DVDs, including all the extras, including all the commentary, including a lot of featurettes, even long form features about filming these movies, and especially the extended editions added scenes back in, but not in a jumbled way, not in a extended scene title card before the scene, but they were integrated fully into the movie. And that included, which as far as I know was completely unprecedented, that included rescoring scenes of the film to accommodate the extended edition, not copying the score from another part of the film, not recycling moments, but rescoring the film for the new 40 minutes of the extended edition, starting with Fellowship of the Ring. It's pretty incredible. And these films, not just Fellowship of the Ring, but the Two Towers and Return of the King extended editions, became pretty much the definitive version. Peter Jackson never said they were that. He just said they were extended. He didn't call them the director's cut. They weren't his favorite cut. He made the cuts and released them in theaters that thought needed to be made. But these had more, a little extra extended editions. And I can't emphasize how popular the behind-the-scenes content was. Hours and hours of it, and hours of commentary. Now, clearly, Peter Jackson was heavily involved with the extra content as well. You can tell from the footage itself that the behind-the-scenes people were with the actors and in all parts of the production all the time. And that includes Peter, and that includes taking away all the preciousness of nobody can see what we're doing on set. They knew it would be useful, and they were open, and I think got really used to living with the cameras. And then the behind-the-scenes team is, I mentioned Peter. Michael Pellerin is the architect of these. They were called the appendices on the DVDs, which is another part of their success, I believe. They were like, as the appendices are to the books of the Lord of the Rings, these were the appendices to the movies of the Lord of the Rings, telling how they were made and giving all the detail, maybe the things that the average person maybe wouldn't love to read, but the information's there just in case you do. So Pellerin and his team shot everything, really everything. There was a documentarian named Costa Boats, and he was doing a fly-on-the-wall documentary about the films, and he did them, and they exist. You can watch them. They're probably on YouTube. They are on YouTube. And Pellerin used some of his footage, but there were cameras everywhere all the time for the duration of the shoot. They are completely documented. So a lot of people call them film school in a box, and it happened 3 times. So if there were 6 hours, it's like 18 hours of extras for these 14 hours of film. It's more like 12 hours of film. So 18 plus extra hours of appendices content to go with the extended edition of the 3 films. Pellerin was also involved with the Peter Jackson King Kong extra content, which is also excellent. People don't love that movie in the same way. I thought it was really fun. Maybe it's a little long. Maybe it was edited funny, but man, there are some amazing parts in that film. Some of the things Peter Jackson does best in cinema are there. And Michael Pellerin was there doing the documentary part of it also. Just really fantastic. Unfortunately, the home video market was in the process of dying not too long after that. So those versions, at least for many, many fans, are definitive, and they made a lot of money in the home video market. And I think actually set expectations for future home video markets or video commerce that couldn't be matched, couldn't be met. They set a pretty high bar. So we're talking about Netflix now earlier in this episode, and we know that Netflix is part of the reason streaming, not just Netflix, but Netflix, part of streaming and probably the leader in streaming, is part of what killed the home video market. Nevertheless, those Lord of the Rings extended editions remain the gold standard of what was possible to do on home video. Part of that is because the actual films were extended and in such a way that was so pleasing to so many, and the total commitment to the extension of those scenes. But it also had a lot to do with the extras of how good they were and how watched they were. And I think also there was a high degree of buy-in from the actors and the crew, not just the actors. So lots of people who were really invested in these films, including all of New Zealand, really. So those films became the home release, became the measuring stick of other home releases, both in terms of quality, in terms of extras, in terms of extended scenes, and in terms of buy-in from cast and crew. And I fully realize that I sound like a Lord of the Rings homer or a Tolkien homer when I say that. So I checked around a lot to make sure that's actually accurate, and it is. People agree. It is worth mentioning a couple of other things. So a little history for you in high prestige home video release. Probably the reason those existed, or any kind of home market video existed, was because of the Criterion Collection, which was a company actually founded in 1984 who licensed films to add it to their Criterion Collection. It was founded by Bob Stein, his wife Lean Stein, and Roger Smith, who was a former Warner Brothers executive. We're going to talk a lot more about Warner Brothers if you keep hanging on. They licensed these classic films for their initial collection because they saw that the Laserdisc, which I don't know if any of you know what that is or how it worked, but it was really cool. And I never owned a Laserdisc player, but my friends did. But these film lovers realized that with the Laserdisc, you could have multiple audio tracks, and you could have super slow-mo or frame-by-frame viewing of a movie. And they knew that you could do it in widescreen. Televisions, of course, were square when they came on market, and they stayed square for a long time. And what really changed that is things like the Criterion Collection and high prestige movies for home use. It made TVs, they're more rectangle shaped now, but they used to be square. So you would get a movie and it would have to be it would cut to fit your television. I'm sure you probably all know a lot about that, but just in case you don't, it used to suck. So the Criterion Collection would license high prestige, a lot of old films actually, like Citizen Kane, the 1933 King Kong, Silence of the Lambs got a really nice release. Blade Runner did as well. And so then building on that kind of tradition of commentary and behind the scenes stuff and beautiful widescreen and a really nice picture, along comes Lord of the Rings. Now, that's not the only really great definitive home video collection that you could have. There is a Blade Runner 5-disc collection that was released in 2007, which is kind of a shrine to that movie. It has the final cut, the original theatrical cut, the international cut, the director's cut, the fabled work print, and a multi-hour documentary called Dangerous Days. It's a really great release. Can't recommend it enough. There's also a prestige release for the Alien films. I think it was called Quadrology or something close to that, the Alien Anthology, and it hit Blu-ray in 2010. And I actually, it's really good. It's better than some Alien films, and I don't even mean that in a disparaging way, but I'm telling you, it's a great collection. And if you're a Star Wars fan, which I don't know, maybe everybody was at some point, and now everybody loves to hate Star Wars, but there was the original trilogy on Laserdisc in 1993, which is kind of the definitive collection. It's what a lot of historians and Star Wars scholars and fans and filmmakers used this a lot. And then there was the 1995 THX edition, which were the first Star Wars films in 1995 to be widely available in widescreen, if you can imagine that. They were loaded with extras, and it was the final analog, non-digital release of the original Star Wars trilogy as well. So all of those are really important landmarks, but absolutely there, creating the measuring stick, is this Star Wars trilogy of extended editions that we're talking about. So hopefully that's not overboard context, but I don't want to just say this thing and then not have it mean much, and then without that context, the rest of what we're talking about is a lot less valuable. So now that we've established firmly in everybody's mind what the extended editions are, let's talk about what the ultimate editions are meant to be. Peter Jackson has talked about this a lot over the years, especially in the early years, but on the commentaries of these films that we're talking about now, he mentions often, or frequently at least, that they'll save this bit of content, or they're saving another bit of content, or they can't show you this because they're saving it for the 25th anniversary or the 50th anniversary, but let's not wait that long, or the 20th, whatever. They're saving something for the ultimate edition of the films. Peter Jackson said this, quote, "I'd love to do an ultimate edition, a final, definitive version when the time is right. There's still a lot of great material that hasn't been seen," close quote. So what is that ultimate edition? There's rumors and information, but nobody knows for sure except Peter Jackson and Michael Pellerin. Here's a quote from Michael Pellerin. He said, "There's so much more we could do. The amount of material we have is staggering. It's just a matter of finding the right time and format to release it," close quote, 2006. Now, this is me translating, and not with Michael Pellerin or Peter Jackson's blessing, but when it says the time is right, what that really means is when the studio will let us, when they will finance it so we can spend the time and the money to do it the right way, the best way, the greatest possible way. When is the time right? When it's financed. Well, so what would be on this ultimate version? One thing that has been talked about a lot of times is a blooper reel. Turns out I've seen the blooper reel. It exists. It does belong on an ultimate version. Fans should have it. It contains a lot of curse words, actually, from actors who are dressed as these characters, but who suddenly break character and become definitely actors in that characters, and they cuss a lot. And it's pretty funny. I am not alone in seeing this. I think there's been little groups here and there who have seen it, and it's probably 5 minutes long, maybe a little longer. It seemed like time flew, and it's been quite a few years since I've seen it, but that exists, and that should be on your ultimate, but that is far from the only content that we know about. I think I have to take back my words. I think those bloopers were closer to 8 to 10 minutes. When principal shooting for Lord of the Rings was underway, it was a 438-day shoot. Sometimes with several units. In fact, probably all the time with several units, meaning that somebody was filming orcs and somebody was, you know what it means when there's different units in the film. So the team shot 7 million feet of film. They shot on Kodak film back then. It was not digital. That is not how they made their movie film. And those 7 million feet of film, if you laid them down, just to put that in perspective, is New York City to Miami. Or it's the Shire to Cirith Ungol. It's too bad it didn't quite get you to Mount Doom, because that would be kind of cool. So that's approximately 1,300 hours of film. And that's a staggering number, and it sounds like an exaggeration. Well, when you make a film, when you're shooting a film, you have to watch each day what's called the dailies. You have to know what you're getting. And some directors will have actors come so they can see themselves. Some will not. Some will never share those kinds of things. And there's somebody who edits things together. So you don't watch every inch of footage, but you watch kind of the highlights or the important things that the team needs to know, primarily the director, probably some producers to check in and make sure they're actually doing something. And often, like I said, not fans, actors or crew could sometimes be invited. Sometimes they make a party of it. all in the lunchroom. But you're working these 12, 14, 16-hour days, and Peter Jackson has said in multiple interviews that they had to watch 3 to 4 hours of dailies every day. I don't know how they fit that all in. They must have done that during lunch. It's really mind-boggling. But if you do a little math, 3 to 4 hours for 480, now I forgot how many days, 438 days, works out to be about 1,300 hours of film. The math checks out. In other words, 1,314 according to my calculator. So clearly that's many takes of certain things. And I am not here saying you can have 1,300 hours of film. Far from it. But it does mean there's a lot of content that we've never seen. Peter Jackson wasn't lying. Michael Pellerin wasn't lying. While I was researching quotes for this podcast, I found this one. Quote, "Fans have been clamoring for an ultimate edition of the films for years, and both Jackson and Pellerin have hinted that it is something they'd like to do when the timing is right." Close quote. That's me. I found my own quote writing from 2009. So I'm quoting myself, but that's how long this has been happening. And it's funny that I said the time is right too, which again, that means whenever we can. So there's quite a lot of content that we know about confirmed that was filmed mostly because we've seen it here and there, either in behind the scenes documentaries or in film documentaries or in like little promotional things or from stills or images or what somebody said in an interview. There's all kinds of clues out there. And if you take the time to put them together, you can come up with a pretty good list. Well, I happen to have a pretty good list. I just don't know how interested people are. I'm going to go through a few of these, and by feel, these are things that should and could be on the Ultimate Edition. Now, let me be clear. I don't think that means that you make a longer cut of the film. I don't think that's what's happening at this point. I don't think we have an extended edition, but I think we see scenes more like some other extras on some other DVDs. Nobody's asking for a 5 or a 6 hour film, especially with the need to rescore and everything else. But I think what really fans and people would like to see is some of this content and to hear more from the actors. I know Jackson has tons of content, but I know Pellerin has tons of content, and Jackson and Pellerin planned it together. You'll hear Jackson from time to time say things like, well, we have this, but we're saving that for the Ultimate Edition. Like he's talked about a lot. So they held stuff back on purpose. So I'm going to go through a few of these things that we know were filmed. One of the last, I think the last thing that was filmed, like when cameras stopped rolling and they said cut for the final time, it was a scene of Aragorn having his armor fitting. So for Return of the King. I'm uncertain if that was in reshoots or if that was in the 438 days. But at some point, that was the final day of filming. Actually, those films never finished filming. They're probably still filming in some ways. And if they ever did this Ultimate Edition, I really believe they would they would shoot new content, actually, almost for sure. Like, for example, you would need to show Hobbiton movie set as it is today and compare it to how it was then. They didn't know what they were, they had no idea this legacy of this place would last, that you could go visit it and walk in a physical representation of a movie set, which is a physical representation of Tolkien's books. They didn't know that. So I don't know how you wouldn't at least have some footage been there. We'll have to do a podcast about that one. So, of course, there's also a whole plot point where Grima Wormtongue poisoned Theodred, and that angered the people of Rohan. There was a reveal at some point that he was behind his death. It sort of helped justify his killing, I guess. You'll remember there's a scene where Sam has a phial of Galadriel, and the Watchers are there, these kind of statues that are sort of magical and kind of weird in the book, and they're in the film, but they're just there. Like, you see them and they're like, oh, cool, fans are excited. But turns out they filmed Sean Astin playing Sam using the phial to walk between the Watchers. Well, I want to see that. I don't know about you, but I want to see how that was captured on film and how it works or doesn't work. This one might blow your mind a little bit. I think everyone knows. I don't know. I shouldn't assume. Aragorn in The Return of the King at the Black Gate fights a great big giant troll. That definitely was a representation of Sauron in his armor that we see in the prologue. So it makes the prologue come full circle. Well, it turns out that before he was even in that armor, he came as a being of light to talk to the armies of Aragorn, and only Aragorn was not deceived. He alone as the king saw him for what he was. So that's a cool scene. I want to see that one. There is a scene that in the movies became basically a telepathic communication between elves in Lothlorien and elves in Elrond's kingdom, but it definitely was filmed that Elrond and Arwen visited Galadriel and Lothlorien, and that there may have even been an elf council with Celeborn, surely, who speaks like an alien in the films in the best way possible. We know an entirely different entrance of Gandalf into Hobbiton was filmed. We know there was footage of Eowyn defending the refugees in the glittering caves. I think maybe that was wisely taken out, but I would want to see it, right? Wouldn't you? There was a Uruk attack on Sam and Frodo when they were leaving for the river. That probably to add some tension, but it was better without, almost certainly. There's a scene near the end of the films where the four hobbits, Sam, Frodo, Pippin, and Merry, are returning to Hobbiton, and they're wise, and they, I guess, sit on top of a hill and reflect on life and things with all their worldly wisdom after they saved it. And I would like to see that as well. There is, in case you didn't have enough endings in the epilogue, there were also endings shot for Legolas and Gimli, and of course Faramir and Eowyn's wedding. They may have all combined those all together, I'm not sure, but it would be interesting to see Gimli and Legolas, perhaps, their friendship, how they spent time together after the War of the Ring. There is an extended council of Elrond, which is no big deal. And there is Gil-galad, who was the Elven king. I think I just quoted a Tolkien poem. And he had quite a book-accurate death at the hand of Sauron, if I have done my reading right. And there's definitely some clips of him next to Elrond, like at the Last Alliance in Elves and Men, which ends up being in the movie's prologue, in the Fellowship of the Rings prologue. Which they use all the time too, all throughout. But anyway, he had a huge part, and the actor said he was pretty shocked that he was cut because he thought his character was central to that whole thing. So it suggests some major reworkings. Well, those are just like little scenes, which are really cool and important. But I know that those are all kind of Peter Jackson shot things, but I know the Michael Pellerin shot things are also massive, and there are many, many stories from the set situations, probably funny ones, probably sad ones, probably cast and crew ones that would be included in this ultimate thing. I can imagine a lot of content, and if I can imagine it, Michael Pellerin and his team already imagined it and very likely did it. For example, when I was an embedded reporter on The Hobbit, I was told, figure it out. Good luck. There you go. One of the things I requested and was granted both by Peter and the production was that I be able to shadow Peter for a day to see what he does, to see where he goes, to see what time he does it, to see his lunch meetings, to see all the things. I am absolutely sure, confident, beyond any doubt that if I thought of that, the documentarians thought of it first and did it and followed him around with those cameras. I am sure there is a lot of content. By the way, this all ties back into what's happening with Warner Brothers now, and I promised to get to that. But I did want to say that in 2020, Park Road Post, which is Peter Jackson's kind of production location in New Zealand in Miramar near Wellington, Park Road Post in 2020 was in charge of rescanning the film and rescanning the film from the extended editions. When you shoot a film on film, Kodak film, as the Lord of the Rings were done, that film has to be stored somewhere. Warner Brothers, as far as I know, last had its big storage facility in Arizona. That means it's safe from weather, it's safe from heat, it's safe from cold, it's archived, it's preserved. I'm not sure how many people are aware, but there are quite a number of films from the early stages of film history that have been entirely lost. We know they exist, but they don't exist anymore. And that's a massive loss. So the studios have learned it's their asset, right? They have created this thing. They have paid a bunch of money and paid a bunch of people and paid hundreds of millions of dollars to create this thing. And when they shot it on film, it was really important for them to save the film. And I bring this up for a reason, but I'm pretty confident that the Lord of the Rings films were in Arizona in a storage in Warner Brothers storage for a long time. So Peter Jackson took them in, say, 2019 or 2020. And in October of that year, it was announced that Warner Brothers Home Video would be releasing not only The Hobbit, but The Lord of the Rings, all of those films in ultra high def extended editions for The Lord of the Rings films. I'm actually unaware of which versions of The Hobbit or if there are any. I don't know. Anyway, that happened. So there is a version of the films now. You buy it at Amazon. I checked. I don't know where there's a video store anymore. I literally don't know where else to buy it. I don't know any place. I know some Barnes & Nobles carry things, but I don't think they carry those. Anyway, you can buy those films again. Turns out, though, if you have HBO Max, like I do, got it for $2.99 a month for a year. Couldn't resist that deal. It's the only streamer I have these days. Anyway, you can go watch them today. I just did. I just watched the first 5 minutes of The Two Towers in ultra high def. And I'm just telling you, I have a pretty decent TV. I don't maybe have a lot of nice things, but I have a solid TV. But I know my internet's not great. And I cast The Two Towers from my phone to my television for 10 minutes to make sure. And it looked pretty great. I was pretty impressed. I don't have my sound system set up because I moved and I'm moving again, blah, blah, blah. I know no one cares about my personal problems, but I'm just telling you that ultra high def on HBO Max looks really good. So what we hope is this Ultimate Edition puts all these restored things in there, maybe with some special effects, maybe not. I don't think that's as important as just seeing them. And we learn more about the filmmaking process because, again, Peter Jackson and Pellerin have said over and over, we've saved things for the ultimate version of these films. Now, when Park Road Post rescanned the extended edition and released them in ultimate high def, did that count? Was that the ultimate edition? It was for the 20th anniversary. It's a really great version of the film, but that's not what was, I don't think, well, I know it isn't. I know it's not what was talked about. I know it's not what Jackson meant when he said they were saving things for the ultimate edition. And that includes a blooper reel, which probably you have to get a bunch of actors to sign off on. I don't know who owns those things, but you don't want to embarrass anyone. But there's lots of content that we want to see. And on the Jackson side, I just made a whole list of what that might be. But on the Pellerin side, I don't think we know because it's interviews they had. It's moments they captured. It's cast and crew. It's all these people, some of which have passed away. Others have gone on to have great film careers. I'm thinking of Tammy Lane in the makeup. And prosthetics. She's nominated for Academy Awards all the time. She was just working there. I think I made the point, though. There's a lot of stuff. So then the question becomes, is this even possible? Could you do this now? There is no home video market or not one like there was. It's a big cost. As soon as you put the extras out, they're on TikTok. I don't actually understand why Warner Brothers hasn't protected its DVD extras, but you can watch all of them on YouTube. And for instance, music does this all the time, and YouTube will remove something if it has non-licensed music. I don't understand why Warner Brothers didn't protect its copyright on the extras. And I think the answer is they don't value it. They don't understand how much it's valued by fans, and they don't understand how much they could get out of it. But what's the model? What's the business model? Is it a streaming service? Is it HBO streaming it? I guess if Netflix buys HBO, it's not that. I think it could definitely be that. And I think Pellerin, instead of making short 20-minute featurettes, they could take the footage and craft it into a long-form documentary and release it in theaters. It could also be a thing that HBO releases periodically and as part of its streaming service, these featurettes along with the movies. But I think the movies are widely dispersed. I'm sure they're still watched, but this is 100% speculation. I have no idea. But I did not hear a bunch of people who were super energized by the 2020 ultra high def release. So I don't know if those sales were soft, if it convinced Warner Brothers that they didn't need to do anything else. I think it might have. I hope not, but I think it might have. One thing that is clear, however, is that Warner Brothers, since that 2020 release, hasn't made any noise or done anything else with the films that I'm aware of. If it were up to me, if I were king, there would be a HBO streaming release of some of the extras with a theatrical release of a full-blown documentary and a theatrical release of the films. And I don't mean a one-day Friday, Saturday, Sunday release for D-Box and then a week later Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I mean more of like 2 weeks for Fellowship, 2 weeks for The Two Towers, and 2 weeks for Return of the King, and 1 week where they in select theaters play all three in a day. And I do think people would go to those with breaks, and you can sell them a lot of hot dogs or popcorn or maybe even healthy food depending on your local theater. Anyway, I think it's real. Now, I'm not a business guy. I don't have a business degree, and I'm not a film executive, clearly. But if I were in charge, or if somebody asked me, that's my pitch. That's what I would make. Now, you can't do any of that without having Peter Jackson fully on board. And I don't know what kind of relationship Warner Brothers and Peter Jackson have at this point. And you need Michael Pellerin fully on board. But I can tell you, I know Pellerin pretty well, and I like him a lot. And he is a Tolkien fan. And he also is a guy who understands the push and pull of adaptations. He's the best guy to do this. And they should have Jackson and Pellerin working at least hand in hand, at least consulting. Now, the promising part of this is what Jackson's been involved with in the last few years. He's a guy who loves a documentary. If you haven't seen it, there is a World War I documentary that Jackson directed and used his technological people to restore called They Shall Not Grow Old, which it is a really wonderful film and worth seeing. There's not probably anyone you know who's as much of a fan of World War I as Peter Jackson is. Well, fan's a terrible use of the word. I don't mean that he's a fan as like, yay, there was World War I. It was obviously horrible, but I think he's super interested in history, and that's his area of focus. So not really a fan, but a little bit of a fanatic, if that makes sense. So the bigger point is this Ultimate Edition, that should happen, maybe a little bit unlikely, and that is a real tragedy for cinephiles. It is a real tragedy for Tolkienites. It's a real tragedy for me personally. I would really like to see more from both of those filmmakers. But let's talk about what this has to do with Netflix and Paramount / Skydance. I hope you have watched the HBO series Succession, because that kind of wrangling for shareholders and the board and CEOs and billionaires is exactly what this is all about with Warner Brothers. Now, I am not a business guy, but I am a journalist, so I'm going to, in the quickest way I can, try to just sum this up for anybody casually to understand what's going on. In the third quarter of 2026, parts of Warner Brothers will be spun off to make its own entity, and that entity is for sale. And the way you buy that is to buy the stocks, many stocks, a controlling number of the stocks, all the stocks. Netflix led, there were several groups, but Netflix was one of those, and its bid was accepted by the board, which will cost Netflix $80 billion. Well, that sounds like an open and shut case, except that one of the other groups who was bidding to buy Warner Brothers was Paramount Skydance. Well, Paramount Skydance didn't like that they had not been accepted, and so they said, listen, we will pay all you shareholders more money per share than this deal from Netflix that your board suggested. They're going to pay you $27, almost $28 per share. Well, we're going to pay you $30, and ours is pure cash. I'm not great at math, but $30 if you have 10,000 shares of a company is a lot better than $28 per share. So the board at Warner Brothers agreed to sell, and then these guys in a hostile takeover came and said, no, don't sell. We'll pay you more. And so in the next, 8 or 10 days, we'll sort of figure out what's going to happen. There are a lot of reasons that this will affect the Tolkien property. I said before, whoever buys this owns the Tolkien films, owns the extended editions, owns any future releases, owns all the things. They own them all. They own Warner Brothers, but by virtue of owning Warner Brothers, they own the Lord of the Rings films that have already been made. That has nothing at all to do with Amazon owning the TV rights for the Second Age. That is not the same thing. So there is a man, a specific one, named David Ellison, and he is behind the Paramount Skydance takeover bid for Warner Brothers. And it turns out he is a massive Tolkien fan. Now, that doesn't mean he's the right guy to handle the Tolkien franchise, but it means he might be motivated by that in part. He is the son of Larry Ellison, who is a billionaire from Oracle, and father is helping son finance this, as are some Saudi Arabian 3 countries. Saudi Arabia is one of them, 3 Middle East countries, and none other than Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of the president of the United States currently. So I wanted to do a little comparison about what if Netflix wins versus what if Paramount wins. But I also am weary of getting caught up in political and business conversation, because that's not what this podcast really is meant to be about. But I went and read the press release from Netflix, and I just have to. It says this: the combination of Netflix and Warner Brothers will offer more choice, more opportunities, and more value. And to that I say, well, not for the consumer. I just believe that's an absolute lie. But Netflix says that all the movies scheduled will be released, and that it will continue to release movies in theaters, but that does go exactly against its business model. For example, it released a really great Frankenstein movie this year from Guillermo del Toro, and it was really hard to actually find it in theaters for the 2 weeks before it showed up on Netflix. Netflix insists that's not why it's buying Warner Brothers, but it looks a lot like eliminating competition from HBO and HBO Max and owning a movie studio and giving it more streaming content for sure. It doesn't look good, in my opinion, and I am the world's expert on my opinion, so that's just my view. Now, could I be wrong? I absolutely could. Do I hope I am? I absolutely hope I am. But this merger, this acquisition is about stock prices, and it's about the board, and it's about shareholders. And the problem, really, the bigger problem here is that that's more important than the value of entertainment or the consumers. My personal values says that art is way more important than that, but that's why I'm not a CEO. That's why I'm just a guy. But do you remember when Disney bought Disney bought Pixar, and Disney said, look, we have this great distribution, the best, and there's Pixar making these great stories. What a team. That's going to be amazing. Well, here we are years later, and Pixar certainly isn't bad. They still make really good movies, actually, and distribute through Disney. Like, great. But Pixar before was absolutely magic every time. Home run every time. So it's not the same. HBO is magic right now and has been for 20 years, probably 30 years. They're the best streaming TV that has been around for decades, with shows like The Wire and The Sopranos and Band of Brothers, the first season of True Detective and the first season of Westworld and Deadwood and Barry. Brilliant show, Barry. Sex and the City, for maybe not my cup of tea, but really good show that really reached people. The Last of Us, which was so good. Big Little Lies. I mentioned Succession. If you've never watched Chernobyl, that is some harrowing television. You have to watch it. Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, a comedy show. Silicon Valley, a very irreverent comedy show, which sort of describes the situation now, actually. The Night Of with John Turturro, really good. John Adams limited series, so good. Angels in America, Big Love. These are sort of risky things that maybe wouldn't be made elsewhere, but they find a home on HBO. They're willing to take these risks. They're willing to invest in these long-term things. Flight of the Conchords, about New Zealand musicians, one of which appeared at the Council of Elrond as Figwit. We'll get to that story someday. The Leftovers, and of course, Game of Thrones, which is currently spinning off in every direction with really expensive, risky fantasy television. In a strange parallel that we talked about in this episode to the Lord of the Rings film franchise, Game of Thrones was going to probably sink HBO, according to many people, instead of saving it. Fantasy television was very risky. Remember that? Now, if you're a big Netflix fan and you're like, yeah, dude, but Stranger Things, 5 seasons. Okay, I like Stranger Things. I like other shows on Netflix. I like Squid Games a lot, for example. But actually made in Korea, right? And just acquired. So I have some concerns, with Netflix. I really do. I really have some fears about what would happen to HBO. Maybe not in the first year, maybe not in the second year, but by year 5, is that same hunger and thirst to tell daring stories, to lure creatives, to go out on a limb, to try slow burn television, to try these dramas that are different. Are those things going to last under Netflix? It makes me think not. But what does that have to do with Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, you ask? Well, I promise it's very related. Give me a minute. One more thing that I need to sound the alarm. I don't need to, but I want to sound the alarm about Netflix. I don't know if you all follow writers of shows very carefully or screenwriting or whatever, but I do. That's a thing I'm very interested in. Well, Netflix, it was rumored, was telling its writers' rooms, like, hey, you have to have characters speak the plot out loud, which ruins all kinds of storytelling, like subtlety or subtext or reading between the lines or having characters lie. Netflix literally told its writers' rooms that people don't pay attention very much. They have to be able to follow the show while they're ironing or cooking. Therefore, well, let me just read the quote. This is a quote from Variety. No, this is from IndieWire in April 2024, followed up by Variety. But these are sources. These are solid sources. The quote is from Netflix to writers: don't assume they're watching closely. If someone's folding laundry or answering texts, they should still follow the story. In other words, have the character say out loud, "Gee, Mr. Frodo, this sure is a hard trip. It sure is sad that we lost our 7 companions, that we are now a broken fellowship, and we got this weird Gollum guy chasing us. I hope we're gonna be okay." That's the kind of dialogue that Netflix wants in the middle of its story in case you're folding the laundry. That's not what HBO does. It's certainly not what Lord of the Rings does. I mean, everybody does it at moments, but we hope we can do better and watch better and be better consumers, right? I hope you hope. Let me just point out that Warner Brothers was pretty much the gold standard for film preservation and for film legacy. They've been around so long that it's in their best interest to preserve film in theaters. Let me say that Netflix has no commitment to theaters. It has a history of using theatrical releases just to qualify for awards, just to get things out long enough to make sure they were released in theaters. They have a business model built on global streaming efficiency, not cinema windows. They have made prior attempts to buy theaters, in fact, for that award season leverage like we talked about. So if Netflix wins the takeover, buys the company, they gain the Warner Brothers, the film library, and the pipeline. And over time, almost certainly theatrical releases will shrink. And the things that will remain will be like Superman, big budget DC movies, mega budget franchises of other kinds that they try to develop, and maybe a few things they think can win some Oscars. But I think much of everything else will just end up going to Netflix. Now, I don't want to say the sky is falling, but I don't know how there's fewer films being released and these giant big budget things, there's not the small films, the small dramas, so it's indie film to the rescue, I guess. But Warner Brothers had a really good year this year, released some really good films, and that it's not speculative to say that it's in big danger of drying up. To say nothing, I've already mentioned HBO, but I don't even know which loss hurts worse. And if Netflix does take over, and they maybe keep all those promises and have robust theatrical releases, great. I was wrong. Never be more happy to be wrong. But I don't see how Netflix and HBO exist in the same world. Like, it literally is the competition. Now, on the other hand, Netflix isn't buying CNN, and the other bid is to buy CNN. And those fellas that love Tolkien also probably have a big motive to eliminate a news source. Now, it doesn't matter if you like the news source or hate it. I think that's not even the issue I'm talking about. But it's the fact that it even exists. And if it ceases to exist, it's a big problem. And that's not, like, in the words of the dude, not just my opinion, man. That's what media watchdogs and journalists and former CNN staff and political analysts are all really worried about with this other takeover bid. So, yeah, it's a problem. And politically, these billionaires have certain loyalties, and certain parts of the government maybe even serve them. So billionaires owning all the media is a little scary. So it's a double-bladed sword, man. It's both ways. So it is absolutely true. It's not window dressing that this Ellison really likes Tolkien. It's not a small thing. To have an owner with a genuine attachment to Middle Earth would seem pretty great. And the way he handles or releases or asks his people to handle or release Middle Earth content, it matters. However, there's another CEO of another billionaire CEO who happens to own Amazon who really loved Tolkien, and maybe that didn't help Tolkien all that much. Maybe it did. Maybe love brings power. So I'm just, you figure that out on your own. Skydance has a good track record with legacy films like Top Gun and Mission Impossible and things like that. It would be fair to say that probably it's more likely that the hostile takeover bid from Paramount Skydance would be better for the Tolkien properties than going to Netflix. HBO probably also. But Tolkien is just a small piece of the puzzle. And I do believe Ellison loves Tolkien, but I don't think he loves him so much to make a crazy financial. It's like $108 billion to buy Warner Brothers. Maybe we should pool our resources and fan own it. That's the way to go, right? Can we do a crowdfunding for $108 billion? But the fate of Tolkien, the fate of the extended editions, the fate of future DVD releases, the fate of, Blu-ray, nobody releases DVD, the decisions about where it streams or when, and the ultimate edition all rest with whoever buys Warner Brothers. I can really see, I don't think Ellison's such a super nerd that he knows Jackson has called for a ultimate edition a bunch of times, but I can see it being possible that he could. I mean, he really likes Tolkien. Now, there's another billionaire who loves Tolkien, and this just sounds political, but he has a company called Palantir, and he seems to have completely missed the point of Tolkien, and he wants to build his technology to spy on everyone. And I'm not exaggerating. That's literally what he said. It sounds like I'm casting him as a villain. I'm not. So just loving Tolkien isn't a basis for anything. It just means you read a book and it affected you. But the better hope probably for the Tolkien movie properties probably is the hostile takeover bid. And I have no idea how it'll go. I asked around and I got like a 60-40 likelihood answer that Netflix is more likely to win this. But I don't know how it'll be. But when you hear these headlines, if you pay any attention at all, it does definitely affect Tolkien. What I hope, though, is that the ultimate DVD home video experience can happen probably through a streaming service instead of physical media that we buy. But I feel like HBO would be a great home for that, and that's possible. But in the meantime, today, all of us can go stream. All of us, maybe. I don't know how it is in other markets. The other thing that's really great about HBO is that it is around the world in some form or another. It cooperates with other streamers in other countries. So I think Netflix actually is the widest, however. So almost every country, has Netflix. So I'm personally really uncomfortable with both acquisitions for different reasons. And obviously I have no say over what happens, and neither do you. So as these things happen, I'm not a shareholder. I won't get my $30 per share. I won't even get $30. But what I hope is that somebody takes care of the property. Whatever else bad happens, I hope that it's well taken care of. But whatever happens, it is absolutely sure that media is changing constantly. We're in the communication age when the platform and the forums and the way things change happen all the time. And this will be another change, and there may yet be another change. Maybe after the richest family in the world buys one of the most prestigious movie studios in the world, maybe they'll fold it, maybe they'll divide it. Or if Netflix buys it, maybe the streamer really will learn to value theaters. There's always room for optimism. We don't know what will happen. But as a person who loves cinema, I hope storytelling and cinema survive. And more than ever, I think independent cinema, independent film is really, really important. I guess I would just remind all of us, myself included, that we vote with our dollars. And we, if I don't like what happens, one of the things I can do is stop buying a product and stop being a product as well. Demand better. Well, not to be so glum. That's not the happiest podcast we've ever had, but I really wanted to thank everyone for your support in 2025. We started this in January, not knowing exactly what would happen. I anticipated speaking to a lot more people and having more guests. So far, that hasn't happened. And I've talked a lot more than I ever imagined that I would. But we have steadily grown the Tolkien audience here, and we've proved collectively that the Tolkien interest is a worldwide interest. And that is certainly not a goal I had setting out. I had no intentions of trying to prove anything, actually, but it's been really gratifying to have a worldwide audience. To know that somebody in Iran listened to these words is pretty neat. Anyhow, I wanted to thank everyone who has shared this podcast with somebody else. I think word of mouth is the only way it has grown, and will continue to grow that way. Best of all, if you just let one other person know that, hey, maybe they can listen to the Tolkien podcast, or recommend a thing you liked. I'm also happy to take feedback and suggestions for content and all kinds of things via email. It's on the webpage, but it's the Tolkien Podcast at gmail.com. Anyway, love your loved ones. Enjoy your holidays, however you celebrate them. We'll probably be back with the next episode next year, although you never know. There's a lot going on. My name is Larry. You've been listening to the Tolkien Podcast.